Assalamu alaikum. This is part two of the video. In the first video, we learned why do we need multiple storage systems inside the computer. In this video, we are going to learn about booting process. Why do we need a booting process or a procedure for a computer to start? Why can't we really just turn on the power, just like we turn on the light, and the light turns on right away? But in the computer, we see that when you turn on the computer, it takes few minutes before it gets ready for use. So the time it takes from when you turn on the power button to the time when it is available for you to use, we call that boot process. There are lots of things happening inside the computer at that time. A sequence of things happening, we call that boot process. So in this video, we are learning, that why we need a boot process. Okay, boot up process. Why do we need a boot up process? Now, we know that the computer has, for everything, to be able to do everything, the main thing in the computer is the operating system. Okay, operating system, OS. And we need OS even to access your monitor, to access your HDD, you need operating system plus DD drivers to be able to access these, right? Because OS is like the nervous system. But the problem is that when the computer is shut down, when the computer was shut down, the operating system and the device driver software and your application software, your apps, they were all sitting on the hard disk drive in the form of, these magnet dots, right? Storage. And I told you earlier in the previous video that in the storage, you pack things tightly. They are not usable because they're stored. To be able to make use of things, you need to bring them out of the storage and display, in a working area or someplace. So when the computer is shut down, everything is on the hard disk drive, on the storage, right? And then the other temporary storage that we learned was the RAM. We call that a temp storage, or we call that a working area, right? The reason we call that a temporary storage because it's a volatile, right? It is volatile. It is volatile means that as long as the power is there, the data is there, you remove the power, everything's gone. Okay. Now here's the problem. Now, for the computer, right? Because the computer always work, and the program has to be running, loaded into the memory for the CPU for the computer to work, but the programs are sitting, or the OS is sitting on the hard disk. So this creates a problem. And the problem was that I described earlier that we need OS to control all the hardware. But when the computer was shut down, the OS is sitting on the hard disk itself. So that creates a chicken and egg problem, right? That you need OS. I need OS to access the HDD, right? I need the OS to access the HDD, right? But to access the HDD, I need OS, right? So this is egg and chicken and egg scenario. Like, for example, when, in the beginning of the world, right? Just like the computer was shut down and starting. So when the world was starting and somebody wanted to have an egg, you want to get an egg, and you were told that, hey, you need a chicken. For the egg, right? So you go and get the chicken, but then you are told that, hey, the chicken comes from the egg. You need an egg. So you get into this cycle. right? You need chicken to have the egg, but you come to the egg, you need egg, you need chicken before. First you need chicken, right? Here's another example. You have a house and the keys are inside the house. For example, let's say you forgot those on the table, the keys, right? And then there's a big door and a big lock over here. Now, to be able to access the keys, you need to open the lock, right? You need to open the lock. But to open the lock, you need the keys. But to get to the keys, you need to open the lock. So you open the lock to get the keys, but first you need keys to open the lock, right? So this is the scenario that we are in, okay? So now that's why we need a boot up process. Let me just explain that now. So what happens in the boot up process, because the OS is here, so during the boot up process, what happens is that your CPU, and there's another programs, I'll explain that later, that somehow the operating system and the device drivers, they need to be brought into the memory. They need to be loaded into the memory. That's the proper term, right? They need to be loaded into the memory in order to use the computer. So in the boot up process, then essentially what happens is that all this stuff is brought from the storage outside into the working area, into the RAM, right? That's why the more RAM you have, the better it is. Your computer will run faster. It's like if you're a big area, you can really just move quickly. But if you have less area, then you have to move things around to get to something, and it takes a longer time. So the more RAM you have, the faster the computer will be, and the more programs you will be able to run. The question is that why don't we have more RAM? Because the RAM is expensive. It's very expensive compared to the price of the hard disk, right? So that's why we cannot have really more RAM, because then the computer becomes very expensive. Again, in the boot up process, we move the OS and the device drivers, all those things somehow into the memory area, and then the boot up process, when OS and DDDs goes into the RAM, and the operating system is rebuilt just like the Legos. That's it. I told earlier, right? Like the Legos were sitting in pieces, and when all those pieces are brought into the memory and put together to make the OS, so the boot up process pass the control on to the operating system. Then operating system becomes in charge and then take control of the whole system, the whole hardware. But to be able to get the OS into the RAM is what we need the boot up process for. I hope you guys understand that.